At my wife's work conference, the hotel concierge handed me an envelope that read, "She checked in 3 days early." The envelope was ivory, hotel stationery, the kind with a small gold crest embossed in the upper left corner, and my name was written on the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. Not printed, handwritten, carefully, like someone who had thought about whether to write it at all and then decided the doing of it mattered enough to do it right. The concierge who handed it to me was a young man in his mid-20s with the professional blankness of someone trained to convey nothing. And when I looked up from the envelope to ask him who'd left it, he was already 3 steps away, angling back toward his desk with the particular efficiency of a person who has fulfilled a task and has no intention of being drawn into whatever comes next. I was standing in the lobby of the Alderton Grand in downtown Portland, Oregon, rolling a carry-on suitcase I'd packed in 40 minutes that morning after driving 2 hours from our house in Eugene because Claudia had called at 7 a.m., sounding strange, and said the conference was going beautifully and she missed me, and why didn't I drive up and surprise her for the last night? They'd be wrapping the formal sessions by 4, and we could have dinner somewhere nice, just the 2 of us. It had seemed, at the time, like exactly the kind of spontaneous gesture our marriage needed. And I'd felt good about it the entire drive. I'd called ahead to make sure they could add me to Claudia's room. The front desk had been perfectly friendly. And then, while I waited for my keycard to be programmed, this envelope had appeared in my hand. I opened it in the lobby, standing next to my suitcase, surrounded by the ambient noise of a busy hotel at 2:15 in the afternoon. Inside was a single note card, 4 words and a number. She checked in 3 days early, room 412. And I had been married to Claudia Voss for 9 years. We'd met at a mutual friend's dinner party in Portland when we were both 29. She was a pharmaceutical sales regional director in training, already sharp-eyed and composed in the way of someone who had decided early that her intelligence was a tool to be deployed precisely. I was a structural engineer with a mid-sized firm in Eugene, methodical by nature. I was the kind of person who reads the terms of service before clicking, agree, and genuinely means it. We were a good match in the practical ways that sustain a marriage over time. Similar financial values, compatible social appetites, aligned on the question of children, which we had decided early we were not having. We bought a house in Eugene's South Hills in our 3rd year together, a 1960s ranch with a good roof and a bad kitchen that we renovated ourselves over 2 summers. We had a dog named Birch, a 7-year-old rescue mutt who slept at the foot of our bed and was the reason neither of us stayed late at work more than we had to. We had inside jokes and a standing Friday date night and a weekend ritual involving the farmer's market and the same coffee shop we'd been going to for 6 years. The life, from the outside, was solid. From the inside, it had been feeling, for maybe 18 months, it may be 2 years, like a room with slightly less oxygen in it than there used to be. Not suffocating, just subtly less than it had been. I'd told myself that was normal. That was what long-term marriage felt like when the early intensity leveled out into something more sustainable. I'd read an article about it. I'd mentioned it to Claudia once, and she'd said she knew what I meant, and I'd believed her. There had been a weekend trip to the coast in the spring that had felt genuinely good, or like finding the oxygen again, and I had held on to that as evidence that we were fine. We were fine. I was standing in a hotel lobby holding a note card that said she'd checked in 3 days ago, and the conference had started yesterday. The room number, 412. I stared at it for long enough that a woman with a luggage cart had to navigate around me, and I didn't notice until she said, "Excuse me," twice. As I folded the note card back into the envelope and put the envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket, where I could feel it against my chest like a second heartbeat, slightly wrong-timed. The front desk had given me a key card to Claudia's room, which I now had to reconsider was Claudia's room in a way I hadn't been prepared to reconsider. And I stood at the elevator bank looking at the key card in my hand, and did the math that I didn't want to do. The conference was a 3-day regional summit for pharmaceutical sales leadership. It ran from Thursday through Saturday. Today was Saturday. If Claudia had checked in 3 days early, she'd been here since Monday. The conference hotel rate didn't begin until Thursday. 3 days early meant she'd been paying something, either out of pocket or on the company card, to be here before the conference started, in a hotel 400 miles from our house, for reasons she had not mentioned to me. I thought about calling her. I thought about it for exactly 12 seconds, during which I stood at the elevator with my hand on the button and felt the specific paralysis of a person who has information they cannot yet process and actions they cannot yet take. Because taking the wrong action right now would collapse the evidence before I understood what the evidence was. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. I did not call Claudia. Room 412 was down a corridor to the left of the elevator. It passed a vending alcove and an ice machine that was making the low mechanical hum of sustained effort. I stood outside the door for a moment. It occurred to me that the note card had given me this room number specifically, and that the room number was not the same room I'd been assigned. I'd been given a key card for room 508, which was the room under Claudia's conference registration. 412 was a different room on a different floor. I put the key card for 508 in my pocket. I knocked on the door of 412. Nothing for a long moment. Then the sound of movement inside, unhurried, the movement of a room that had been occupied long enough to feel like home. The door opened. The man in the doorway was wearing a hotel bathrobe and had the look of someone who'd been very comfortable until approximately 1 second ago. He was 40-something, athletic build going slightly soft at the middle, it with the groomed appearance of someone who spent money on himself without thinking about it. He looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us said anything for a beat that lasted about 3 years in my internal timeline. Then he said, "Can I help you?" in the tone of a man who believed he was still in control of the situation because he didn't yet understand what situation he was in. I told him my name. I told him I was looking for my wife, Claudia. I watched the control leave his face. Not all at once, in stages, like a building settling. His name, I learned in the next 48 hours, was Rowan Briggs. He was the vice president of national accounts at Claudia's company, Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Her direct superior in the organizational structure, the man who had approved her promotion to regional director 3 years ago and had overseen her territory expansion 18 months ago. He was based in San Francisco, married, 2 children in middle school. He had emerged through a combination of what I saw in the next few minutes and what I later documented with help I will get to shortly. The person my wife had been having an affair with for approximately 14 months. I know the 14 months figure because the evidence established it. At the moment I was standing in the doorway of room 412, I knew only that there was a man in a bathrobe in a hotel room that a stranger had felt compelled to point me toward. And that my wife's name had made something happen to his face that I would not forget for the rest of my life. I did not make a scene in the doorway. I am not a scene-making person by temperament. And in any case, the scene had already been made by the situation itself. I was merely standing inside it, trying to take a reading of the room. I looked past Rowan into the room. 2 glasses on the desk. Champagne, probably. Or from the shape and the pale gold color catching the afternoon light through the window. A second bathrobe on the chair near the bathroom. A woman's watch on the nightstand that I recognized because I had bought it for our 5th anniversary. I took a photograph of all of this before Rowan stepped into my line of sight, which he did when he realized what I was doing. I stepped back from the doorway. I told him I didn't need to come in. I told him I had everything I needed. I took the elevator back down to the lobby, sat in a chair near the window overlooking the street, and did not move for 11 minutes while I decided what kind of person I was going to be from this point forward. The kind of person I decided to be was methodical. I was an engineer. I understood load-bearing structures. I understood that the way you respond to a failure determines whether what comes next is controlled or catastrophic. And I was not interested in catastrophic, or not for its own sake. What I needed was to understand the full scope of what I was looking at before I took any action that I couldn't take back. I called my older brother Nate from the lobby because Nate was a family law attorney in Seattle with 17 years of practice and the specific practical intelligence of a person who had seen every variety of marital collapse and knew which moves mattered and which ones felt satisfying but cost you later. "Tell me what happened," he said. And I told him in the precise, sequential way of someone giving a report rather than having a breakdown, because the breakdown was available to me, but could wait. Nate listened without interrupting, which was a professional habit that I always found reassuring in a crisis. When I finished, he said 3 things. First, do not confront Claudia yet. Second, document everything you can access legally before she knows you know. Third, call a local PI, not because you need more evidence of the affair, but because you need a full picture of the financial exposure before you make any decisions. He said he could recommend a firm in Portland he'd worked with on cases before, a woman named Greta Olson who ran a 2-person operation and was meticulous and discreet. I told him to text me her number. He did within 4 minutes. Greta Olson answered on the second ring, which told me she was the kind of person who treated her phone like a tool rather than an interruption. She was 53 years old, former investigative journalist turned licensed private investigator with 21 years in the field and a particular focus on matrimonial and financial cases. She had a direct manner that reminded me of my first engineering professor. No unnecessary words, no performed sympathy, just the efficient transfer of information between two people who had a problem and were trying to solve it. I described the situation from a parking garage 2 blocks from the hotel, back where I'd walked to have a conversation that the lobby didn't allow for. She asked clarifying questions in a specific order. How long married, joint finances or separate, any prenuptial agreement, any jointly held business interests, real property. I answered everything. She said she could have someone on site within 2 hours for initial documentation and could begin a financial audit of jointly accessible accounts within 24 hours. She quoted me a retainer of $3,500, now which I authorized by phone and confirmed by email within the next 10 minutes. One more thing, she said before we hung up. Do you know who left you the envelope? I told her I didn't. She said she'd look into it. She said, sometimes the person who tells you is as important as what they told you. I thought about that for a while after we hung up, standing in the concrete geometry of the parking garage. Yes, thinking about a hotel concierge who had taken 3 careful steps away from me after pressing an envelope into my hand. I did not go back inside the Alderton Grand that afternoon. I checked into a different hotel 2 blocks away. A Marriott, nothing remarkable, clean and functional. Under my own name, using my personal credit card rather than the joint one, following Nate's advice about financial separation during the documentation phase. I texted Claudia from my new room at 4:42 p.m. Stuck in Eugene. Work emergency came up. So sorry. Rain check on the dinner. Love you. She replied within 7 minutes with a sad face emoji and the words, I was looking forward to it. Next time. The ease of it. The speed. The emoji. 7 minutes to compose that response after spending 3 days in a hotel room with a man in a bathrobe. And she produced a sad face emoji without apparent effort. I put my phone face down on the bed and sat with my hands on my knees and breathed through my nose the way I breathed through the hard moments on difficult job sites. The moments when something was structurally wrong and the consequences were significant and you needed your mind to function rather than react. I breathed. I thought. I looked at what I actually knew versus what I was inferring. I made a list in the Notes app on my phone because making lists was how my brain worked. Because structure was what I had when feeling was too large to manage. Greta's associate, a 30-something man named Saul Fairbanks, who had the unremarkable appearance of someone professionally committed to being unnoticeable, delivered a preliminary report to my email at 9:18 that evening. He had documented, through observation of publicly accessible areas of the hotel, the following. Rowan Briggs had checked into room 412 on Monday at 3:40 p.m. Claudia had checked into the same room as an additional guest at 4:55 p.m. the same day. Both names appeared on the room registration. This was a matter of hotel records, which Saul had accessed through a source I didn't inquire about. Rowan Briggs had also, simultaneously, a room registered in his name alone under his corporate account. Room 508, the room that appeared in Claudia's conference registration and that I had been given a key card for. The 2-room arrangement was, Saul noted in his characteristically dry tone, a standard structure for concealment. Keep a record of the official room for corporate documentation. Actually stay in a second room not linked to the conference booking. Professional. The kind of thing you do when you've done it before and thought about the paper trail. I read the report twice, then called Greta directly. She confirmed what Sol had sent and added a piece of information that recalibrated everything. The charges on the second room. The $412 for Monday through Wednesday were not on Claudia's corporate card and not on any card in her name. They were on a personal credit card belonging to Rowan Briggs. He's been paying for it, Greta said, all 3 days of it. She hasn't spent $1 on this room that we can find. I asked what that meant to her, in her experience. She said it meant one of 2 things. Either he was paying as a gesture of control, or he was paying to keep her name off the documentation in a way that was specifically designed to limit her exposure. Which way does that read to you? She asked. I told her I didn't know yet. She said we'd find out. The financial audit Greta ran over the next 36 hours produced information that I had not anticipated and that changed the nature of what I was dealing with in ways that took me time to absorb. Our joint accounts were intact. The checking, the savings, the home equity line we'd opened for the kitchen renovation and never drawn down. No unusual withdrawals, no suspicious transfers. But Claudia had a personal account I had known about in general terms. A savings account she'd opened before we met that she maintained separately, which was a thing I had always considered reasonable and had never questioned. What Greta found was that this account had received transfers from a source that was not Claudia's salary over the past 14 months. Regular transfers, varying amounts between $1,800 and $4,200, totaling just under $41,000 over the period. The source was a shell company registered in Delaware called Meridian Advisory Services, LLC, Meridian, the same word as the pharmaceutical company where both Claudia and Rowan Briggs worked. Greta found the registration documents for Meridian Advisory Services. Rowan Briggs was the sole registered agent. He had been paying my wife $41,000 outside of her salary for 14 months through a company that existed for no apparent purpose other than to make payments that a direct personal transfer would have made visible. I stared at the document Greta emailed me, registration papers, bank transfer records, account statements, until the numbers stopped looking like numbers and started looking like the architecture of something I didn't have a word for. It wasn't just an affair. There was a financial structure around it. There was planning. There was a paper trail that someone had tried to make difficult to follow. There was $41,000. I called Nate at 11 p.m. and read him the financial summary Greta had sent. He was quiet in the way that lawyers are quiet when they're calculating rather than simply thinking. When he spoke, he used the phrase marital asset dissimulation, which I had to ask him to explain. And he explained that receiving financial payments from a third party that are not disclosed to a spouse during the marriage has legal implications in the context of a divorce proceeding, particularly in Oregon, which is an equitable distribution state. He also used the phrase potential employment law violation because if Rowan Briggs was a corporate officer making payments to a subordinate through a shell company, there were layers of potential liability that extended beyond the personal into the professional and possibly the regulatory. He told me I needed a family law attorney in Oregon, not just his counsel from Seattle, and he recommended a woman named Lorraine Achebe, who practiced in Portland and had, in Nate's words, the particular combination of intelligence and patience that this kind of case requires. I emailed Lorraine Achebe at 11:20 p.m. from my Marriott room, not expecting a response until morning. She replied at 11:51 with a request to meet at 8 a.m. I replied yes before I turned off the light. Lorraine Achebe was 48 years old, a family law attorney with 19 years of practice in Portland, and she had the quality I had been told to expect. A kind of settled, comprehensive attention that made you feel that your situation, however tangled, was within the range of what she'd navigated before. She reviewed everything I'd given her, Greta's reports, the financial records, the photos I'd taken in the doorway of room 412, my brother's preliminary notes. In methodical silence, across the conference table in her firm's offices, a corner building in the Pearl District with good light and the organizational efficiency of a place where serious work happens. When she finished reading, she put the documents in a neat pile and looked at me directly. "You have a clean case," she said. "The affair is documented. The financial transfers are documented. The undisclosed payments from a corporate superior to a subordinate are a separate issue that I'm going to flag for an employment attorney colleague who handles exactly this kind of thing, because that is potentially actionable on several fronts that go beyond your divorce." She paused. "I want to ask you something before we discuss strategy. What do you want from this?" I told her I wanted an honest accounting of what the marriage had been and an equitable dissolution of what we'd built together. I told her I was not interested in a public destruction of Claudia as a person, but I was interested in a complete and accurate legal resolution that reflected the reality of the situation, including the financial transfers. Lorraine wrote something on her notepad. "That's a useful answer," she said. "But people who come in wanting scorched earth tend to make the process longer and more expensive and don't end up with better outcomes. You can be firm and clean at the same time. Let's do that." The person who had left me the envelope was a woman named Daisy Kamani. I know this because Greta found her. Daisy was 24 years old, a front desk associate at the Alderton Grand who had been working the overnight shift on Monday when Claudia and Rowan checked into room 412. Now, Greta found her through the hotel's staff scheduling records, which she accessed through means I remained appropriately incurious about, and spoke to her in person on Sunday morning while I was in Lorraine's office. Adiz had, it turned out, recognized Claudia from a prior stay. Claudia had stayed at the Alderton Grand for a company event 8 months earlier, and Adiz had checked her in on that occasion as well. She had recognized her again on Monday. He processed the room check-in for the couple and thought nothing of it until Claudia called the front desk at 2 a.m. on Monday night in a panic because she'd left her wedding ring in the bathroom of the hotel restaurant and needed someone to go retrieve it before housekeeping came through. Adiz had gone herself, found the ring, returned it to Claudia at the door of room 412 while Rowan Briggs was visible in the room behind her, and had filed that image away somewhere in the part of her mind that notices things and doesn't know what to do with them yet. When I'd appeared at the front desk on Saturday, asking to be added to a room registered under my wife's conference booking, Daisy had looked up the reservation, seen my name on the conference documentation as Claudia's emergency contact, thought about the ring at 2 a.m., and the man in the room behind her, and made a decision. She'd written the note card herself. On her break, slipped it to her colleague at the concierge desk with instructions to hand it to me when I came to pick up my key card. She had not used her own name because she'd been worried about her job. She hadn't been sure she was doing the right thing. She'd done it anyway. When Greta asked her why, Adize said, "I kept thinking about how I'd want someone to tell me." I did not call Claudia on Saturday night or Sunday morning, where I spent Sunday in Lorraine's office and on the phone with Nate and going through Greta's escalating documentation with the focused attention of someone building a case, which is what I was doing. By Sunday afternoon, I had a complete picture. 14 months, $41,000 in undisclosed transfers, a parallel room registration that Rowan had paid for entirely, a relationship that had begun based on the email and text evidence Greta had legally accessed through our joint phone plan records, to 3 months after Claudia's promotion, which Rowan had approved. The timing of the promotion was a particular kind of information that sat in my chest like a stone. Lorraine flagged it for the employment angle. I sat with it for different reasons. 3 months after the promotion, 2 years ago, 2 years ago, something in the room had shifted and I had told myself it was normal. That was what long-term marriage felt like. And I had held on to a weekend at the coast as evidence that we were fine. We had been fine in the way that a structure is fine when you haven't yet done the load analysis. I filed for divorce on Monday morning. Lorraine filed the paperwork at 9 a.m., including a motion to disclose all financial accounts and transfers as part of discovery, and served Claudia at her office at Meridian Pharmaceuticals in Eugene at 2:15 p.m., which is the moment Claudia learned that I had been in Portland. That I had been 2 blocks away, that I had spent the weekend building a case while she was texting me sad face emojis. I know the moment of service was 2:15 p.m. because Claudia called me at 2:17, and I know it was 2:17 because I looked at the clock when my phone rang and made a deliberate choice not to answer it. She left a voicemail. I listened to it once, that evening, in my car in the driveway of the house we'd shared for 6 years, before I went inside. But it was 4 minutes and 38 seconds long. I won't reproduce all of it here, but the architecture of it was initial shock, then rapid recalibration, then an argument that what had happened could be explained and worked through, then an appeal to the years we'd spent together and the life we'd built. Then something that was almost an acknowledgement of the financial transfers and almost an explanation for them. Then a request for me to call her back before I did anything else. I deleted the voicemail. I went inside and sat on the kitchen floor with Birch, who put his head in my lap with the uncomplicated fidelity of a dog who asks nothing about the situation and offers everything anyway. And I stayed there for a long time while the light changed in the windows and the house made its settling sounds around me. The filing had been the right move. Lorraine had been clear about that. Once it was in motion, and the discovery process would compel disclosure of everything: the account, the transfers, the corporate structure of Meridian Advisory Services. Rowan Briggs's name would appear in the financial discovery documents. What happened to him from there was a separate proceeding, but Lorraine's employment law colleague, a man named Douglas Firth with 23 years in labor and employment litigation, had already sent a letter to Meridian Pharmaceuticals' legal department outlining the potential liability associated with an officer making payments to a subordinate through a shell company during an undisclosed personal relationship. Douglas had described the exposure in a call with Nate as significant, and the kind of thing companies respond to very quickly when they receive a letter like this. Because the alternative is worse. Meridian Pharmaceuticals responded to Douglas's letter in 6 business days. The response came not through their legal department, but through a corporate HR announcement that Rowan Briggs had resigned from his position as VP of National Accounts to pursue other opportunities, effective immediately. The announcement did not mention the letter. It did not need to. Lorraine forwarded me the HR announcement with a single line of commentary. They moved fast. They know what they have. In the discovery process that followed, Meridian Advisory Services, LLC, was dissolved. The $41,000 in transfers was documented, assessed for tax implications, and factored into the equitable distribution calculation. Oregon law treats marital assets broadly, and undisclosed financial benefits received during the marriage, even through a third-party structure, have to be accounted for in the settlement. Lorraine was precise and thorough about this. What the house went to me, as the original inheriting party with documented sole contribution to the down payment. Claudia received her share of the retirement accounts and the joint savings, less the assessed value of the undisclosed transfers. It was not punitive. It was accurate. There is a difference, and I had wanted accuracy. The divorce was finalized 4 months and 11 days after I'd stood in a hotel lobby and opened an ivory envelope. Well, Claudia and I had no direct communication during that period beyond what was legally required, a fact that Lorraine managed efficiently through the formal process. I heard, through a mutual friend who felt obligated to keep me informed and whom I eventually asked to stop, that Claudia had left Meridian Pharmaceuticals 2 months after the filing, that she was working for a competitor in a different region, that she and Rowan Briggs were no longer in contact. I don't know if that last part was true, and I found, as time passed, that I was less interested in knowing than I expected to be. What I was interested in was the house, which I was keeping. I'd repainted the kitchen the first weekend after she moved out, because it had needed it for 2 years, and there had always been a reason not to. I'd taken Birch to the coast the following month, just the two of us. And we'd walked the beach for 3 hours in the specific freedom of not having to be anywhere or perform anything for anyone. I'd called Adaize Kimani. Greta had given me her number with her permission, and told her that the envelope had mattered, and asked if I could do anything for her. She'd said no, she didn't need anything. But thank you for closing the loop. She'd wondered how it turned out. I told her it had turned out the way it needed to. She said she was glad. And I told her what she'd done took courage. She said she just thought about how she'd want someone to tell her. That simple human logic, I would want to know, therefore I will tell you, had restructured the next 10 years of my life. Maybe more. Greta Olson sent me her final billing summary with a note at the bottom that said, "Cases like yours are the ones that remind me why I do this work. Not the drama of it, but the clarity. You handled it cleanly." I framed that, which is not a thing I do normally. I'm not a person who frames things and puts them on walls, but I framed it and put it on the wall of my office. And when people ask what it means, I tell them it was a professional compliment I received during a difficult year, and that's true enough. What I don't tell them, because it would take too long to explain, is that the compliment landed differently than it might have because I'd spent 9 years believing I was in a solid marriage with a good foundation and appropriate load distribution, and it had turned out that I'd been reading the structure wrong the entire time, and the clean handling of the collapse was the only thing I had fully controlled from start to finish. That matters. Engineers know that. You can't always prevent the failure. You can choose how you respond to it, and the response is what determines what's standing when the settling stops. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was having coffee at the farmer's market, the same one, the same coffee shop, when I ran into a woman I'd met once at a job site 2 years prior. Her name was Priya Mehta. She was a landscape architect who had consulted on a project I'd been engineering, and we'd had one conversation about soil load tolerances and how they were more interesting than they sounded. And then the project had ended, and I hadn't thought about her again until she was standing in front of me with a cup of coffee and the direct, interested quality of a person who remembers conversations and finds them worth resuming. She asked how I'd been. I told her I'd had a significant year. She said that sounded like it had a story. I said it did. She said she had time. I said, so did I. We sat at one of the outdoor tables in the October light and talked for 2 hours. And when I drove home, Birch was waiting at the door with his usual complete conviction that my arrival was the best thing that had happened all day, and the house smelled like fresh paint and the life that was being rebuilt inside it. And I thought about an ivory envelope and a woman I'd never properly met who had made a decision at 2 a.m. based on the simple logic of what she would want if the situation were reversed. I owed her a life. I intended to build a good one.